It's a little late here, so I'm going to try to get through this video fairly quickly. But someone asked me earlier today about the synagogues, and when I asked them to clarify their question, they said, are they like the church buildings in the United States? Are they a place of gathering together? Okay, so the first thing that you need to understand is that that Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. They're not two separate things, as they've been made to seem like. And Christians have a fine way of wanting to set aside all of the things that God has commanded. And so they try to separate themselves. This is counterfeit Christianity. They try to separate themselves by saying, oh, there's Jewish holy days and Christian holidays. No, there's not. Since when? The first Christians were Jews, guys. They weren't saying, oh, no, we're not Christians, we're Jews. Christianity is for the Gentiles. I don't understand where this mentality even comes from. Jews did not have a Messiah yet. They didn't have a Christ yet. So they weren't called Christians until Christ came. In the fulfillment of the law, when the Messiah came and was crucified, they became Christians, followers of Christ. Do you understand why they couldn't be Christians previously? Because there was no Christ. So once he came, the promised Messiah who had been promised to the Jews, then they became Christians. And they weren't like, well, now that we're Christians, we're going to have to make up some holidays. Okay, so with that said, you have to understand that those who actually accepted Christ are Jews. Those are true Jews. Paul said a Jew is not one who is one externally, outwardly through circumcision, but internally through circumcision of the heart. So when Gentiles are engrafted into the commonwealth of Israel, when Gentiles who are a wild olive shoot or wild olive branch are engrafted into the natural tree, they become Jews. Through what? Through circumcision of the heart. We have the same covenant. There is no favoritism. Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. Whatever people are calling Judaism today is not Judaism. If you haven't accepted the Messiah who was promised, that is not Judaism. In Revelation 2 and 3, God, when talking with the church in Smyrna and the church in Philadelphia, God references those who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. Twice. He references them twice. So he tells you ahead of time that there are going to be imposters. In Romans 11:28 through 29, Paul says very clearly that as far as the gospel is concerned, Jews who have not accepted Christ are enemies for your sake. He said, but as far as election is concerned, they're loved on account of the patriarchs. So it's not like they're enemies, like let's go hurt them. That's not what we're talking about here. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake. So it makes no sense for Christians to be sitting on YouTube listening to people who call themselves rabbi. Why are you going to go get your gospel from someone who has not accepted Christ? Does that make any sense, guys? Don't do that. It's written in the word. Again, I want to remind you that a Jew is not a race to God. A Jew is one who is circumcised in heart. That means Gentiles, when they are engrafted into the commonwealth of Israel, become spiritual Jews. That is the basis by which someone is defined as a Jew, not by race, not by living in the Middle East, not by being called rabbi. Now, the question was, are these synagogues the same as these counterfeit churches? Yes. I mean, as far as being counterfeit, a counterfeit is a counterfeit. Jesus made it very clear in John 4 that those who worship God, true worshipers, must worship him in the spirit and in truth. Not in a synagogue, not in a temple, not in Jerusalem, not in a cathedral. God is spirit. True worshipers must worship him in the spirit and in truth. Do you think that God has exempt people who don't have religious freedom from worshiping him? I mean, he's made a way for us to worship him in the spirit and in truth, for everyone to be ministered to by his Holy Spirit. Are we commanded to assemble? Absolutely. Did the early church have a cathedral? Did they have a temple? Did they have a place that... No, they were hiding. Do you guys realize that? It was illegal to be a Christian. They were hiding from the Jewish leaders for fear of death, for fear of being killed. What was happening to the apostles? They were being flogged in the synagogues, jailed, in chains for Christ. Is that what's going on now? Because, I mean, it's never been more popular to be Christian. And that's not what the word says. So where do you think that's coming from? The key that you need to understand is that God refers to these churches as prostitutes. So what is the fruit that they're bearing? Are they making God a marketplace? Absolutely. They have totally made a business of supposedly serving God. That wasn't a thing in the Bible, was it, guys? Early Christians wouldn't have even had the ability to do that, but Paul told you, he warned you that people were going to do this. He warned you that there were going to be people among us who were going to try to take this for their own glory and lead you astray. Christ warned you that an enemy was going to plant weeds among his church. And in the book of Daniel, it says that the Antichrist is going to establish himself in the beautiful land. The beautiful land are God's people. That's exactly what happened with the harlot Catholic Church and the prostitutes that bore out of her. In Revelation 17, that harlot Catholic Church that began counterfeit Christianity, that everyone just goes chasing after, because it's so popular to be a follower of Christ. What are the prostitutes that bore out of her? Well, those calling themselves Jews and saying that they practice Judaism right now, that's one of them. They claim that they're the holders of the Hebrew calendar, and yet they've changed the Hebrew calendar. They added a leap year, they added a second calendar, they prostituted it to the Gregorian calendar in order to line up with the Gregorian calendar and the seasons. That's not God's calendar. And God told us in the Bible, in Hosea, trying to remember the other passage, but definitely in Hosea, he talks about removing our holy days, removing new moons and Sabbaths, so we haven't even been observing correctly. And then he talks about in Ezekiel, in the third temple, which is what we are. No third temple in the Middle East, guys. We are the third temple. In that third temple, we're going to be observing those holy days again. So he is reinstituting them in the end times. So what would you look at? How would you know if one of these are a prostitute? Well, the first thing would be, is it a marketplace? Are they trying to make a business of God? Do they have secondary gain? I don't have secondary gain. I take a hit for what I'm doing. I'm on the verge of losing my house right now to do what I'm doing. I haven't asked you guys for anything. I've trusted God to supply my needs. Do they set up images on their steeples, in their sanctuaries, around their necks? Do they draw them on their forehead? Because that cross is an image. It is an image that was set up by Constantine. And it's so interesting how the prostitutes that bore out of her loved to point the finger at each other and at her. And, there's all this infighting between them, called a divided kingdom. They're always fighting with each other. And they don't even acknowledge that they have continued in her prostitutions. They're exactly the same as her. They are of the same Antichrist kingdom. They set up images. They follow her counterfeit holidays. Easter and Christmas, setting up little nativity scenes. What do you think that is? When you set up a little statue of Jesus, that's an image. It's so interesting that, people get so disgusted that the Pope is kissing a statue of Jesus or a so-called Jesus or is kissing a cross or whatever it is. But they continue in these things. They don't even have the sense to understand that they do it every Christmas. And where is Christmas in the Bible? It's not December 25th. If you were reading the Bible, you were observing his holy days that he talks about in Leviticus 23, you would understand that Christmas is not in there. There's no separate Jewish holy day and Christian holiday. You would understand the ways that God has us observing his holy days, and they are nowhere near what pagans are doing on Christmas and Easter. I mean, for 1 second, have you guys even thought that when the world starts accepting your so-called holy days, the Feast of Nativity, Christmas, when pagans are celebrating these things, shouldn't the light bulb go on? And what about Sabbaths? Are they observing Saturday Sabbath, Sunday Sabbath? Because these are not God's days. God's days are numbered. They're not named, and they're numbered for a reason, because they're set in reference to the faithful witness in the sky, his new moon. And it just so happens that on God's calendar, there are not a relentless set of 7-day weeks. There is the first day of the month, which is a rest day, then 6 work days and a rest day. And that goes on, those weeks go on 4 times consecutively, but there are 2 days in between. And that is the 30th day of the month, which is usually a work day, and the first day of the month, which is a rest day. There are 30 days in God's month. That's made clear in Genesis and in Revelation. So it's impossible for Saturday or Sunday, named after Roman gods, It's impossible for those to be Sabbath. Sabbath has to be counted down from the new moon. So these should be hallmark indicators to you that these are cults, that they are counterfeit, and you should not be going to people who have not accepted the Messiah to tell you about your gospel. Please don't do that. The word has already warned you not to do that. I hope I've answered your question. Please discern this message with God. And if you have other questions, please feel free to ask me. Just make sure that you're discerning me. Are you discerning with God whether what I'm speaking is true? Please make sure that you do that.